Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're diving into a genuinely fascinating and highly emotive theological framework. We're looking at a deeply passionate sermon by Dr. Daniel Olakoya, and he makes a really bold claim. He posits that true spiritual power and genuine revival, well, they don't come from a place of strength. They actually come from a highly unexpected source, complete and total brokenness. It's an idea that totally flips conventional thinking on its head, so let's explore exactly how this theology is constructed. Okay, let's dive into this. To make sure you walk away with a crystal clear understanding of this framework, we're going to methodically dissect it. We'll be looking at the paradox of brokenness, the law of the seed, the price of spiritual power, the traits of the unbroken, and finally, the exact steps to true brokenness. Starting right off with Section 1, the paradox of brokenness. The entire thesis of this sermon rests on this massive, mind-bending contrast. Think about it. We humans instinctively discard things that are broken, right? We see them as useless. But God, according to this theology, God operates in the exact opposite way. He literally only uses what is broken. And to illustrate this, the speaker brings up something you'd probably never expect in a sermon: Humpty Dumpty. In the eyes of men, Humpty falling off that wall and shattering into a million pieces is a total tragedy. The guy's ruined. But the sermon argues that while humans see that shattering as the end of usefulness, heaven sees that exact state of being completely scattered and broken as an absolute necessity. Now, you might be wondering, what exactly does brokenness even mean in this context? Because we're not talking about physical injury or emotional trauma here. The sermon defines it as the death to self. It's this complete crushing of self-will. True brokenness means handing over 100% of your life to God, responding humbly to divine conviction, and essentially allowing your own pride and personal ambitions to entirely die off. The speaker really drives this definition home with a vivid and honestly rather shocking childhood anecdote. He talks about a schoolboy who had bought a bowl of rice and egusi soup. But there was a whole line of other hungry kids begging for his food. So to stop them, the boy intentionally mixed his meal with spit, then a little urine, and finally dirt. And each time he asked the other boys, "Do you want this?" The wild thing is, they all said yes. They were willing to eat it regardless. Dr. Olakoya uses this intense, jarring imagery to make a very specific point. True brokenness means saying yes to God even when what is being asked of you is incredibly unpalatable, uncomfortable, or just flat-out demanding. And this brilliantly illustrates our next point. Let's look at Section 2, the law of the seed. To prove that breaking has to happen before creation, the speaker doesn't just rely on abstract theology. He roots this concept directly in the physical laws of nature. It's like a rapid-fire list of metaphors that builds a hugely compelling case. Think about it. For a plant to grow, the soil must literally be broken open. It takes a broken cloud to produce rain. Grain has to be completely crushed and broken to produce bread. The speaker even points back to the biblical story of the rock at Horeb. That rock had to be violently struck and broken before water could flow out to save the people. The point is, in both nature and scripture, a breaking point absolutely must precede sustenance. This whole idea is anchored by a very specific scripture used in the text, John 12:24. It states that unless a kernel of wheat falls to the ground and dies, it remains just a single seed. But if it dies, it produces many seeds. The theology here emphasizes that just like that tiny piece of maize, a person has to break open and undergo a true death of the self in order to multiply, yield fruit, and be filled with uncommon power. Which brings us to Section 3, the price of spiritual power. This is where the sermon gets incredibly concrete. It shifts to a gripping narrative juxtaposition to show you the literal life-or-death consequences of being broken versus unbroken. The most striking example is this wild story about two different missionaries sent to the exact same village. The first missionary arrives and is immediately confronted by a native doctor who somehow uses magic to make a piece of corn grow rapidly right on his palm. The missionary is terrified, deeply intimidated by the strange power, develops a severe headache, and actually dies. But then a second missionary is sent. This time it's a woman. Faced with the exact same magic trick, you know what she does? She simply laughs. She calls upon divine fire, completely incapacitating the native doctor. The speaker's assertion here is crystal clear. She survived and triumphed solely because she was a broken child of God, while the first missionary was unbroken and therefore powerless. He reinforces this by contrasting two major biblical figures, King Saul and King David. Look,
Both of these guys committed terrible sins, but the difference is in their reaction. When confronted, Saul justified his disobedience. He made excuses and blamed external circumstances. David, on the other hand, exhibited profound godly sorrow. He immediately repented and humbly admitted his fault. No excuses. The speaker makes a crucial point here. Living a flawless life isn't the requirement for power. Rather, the true hallmark of a broken spirit is how quickly and completely you exhibit godly sorrow when you fall short.
So what does an unbroken person look like today? Let's move to section 4, traits of the unbroken. Now, what's really interesting about this next concept is that it acts as a direct spiritual self-audit. The sermon asks listeners to evaluate themselves using this completely unique metaphor regarding personal offenses. Just picture the difference between poking a worm and touching a snake. If you touch a worm, what does it do? It humbly coils away, it avoids conflict. But if you touch a snake, it's going to strike back with immediate defensive anger. According to the sermon, if you are quick to strike back, defend yourself, and retaliate the absolute second you're offended, you have the spirit of a snake. You are completely unbroken. The sermon then rolls out a list of other specific symptoms of an unbroken spirit. We're talking about things like harboring deep pride and having an unteachable nature, spreading unfounded rumors and gossip, holding on to past offenses, and outright hypocrisy, putting on a holy face at church but acting completely different the moment you're out on the street. It even includes treating theology like a buffet, picking and choosing only the easy, comfortable scriptures to follow. The speaker boldly claims that the modern scarcity of divine power is directly tied to these common, unbroken traits that are just so prevalent today. Let's move to and see how this builds into our final segment. Section 5, Steps to True Brokenness. If you're listening to this and realizing you might be unbroken, the speaker doesn't just leave you hanging with guilt. He provides a highly actionable sequential roadmap. There are exactly 5 steps to accessing what he calls the socket of divine power. Step 1 is a foundational surrender of your life. Step 2 is sitting down to conduct a brutally honest personal self-analysis. Step 3 is making a literal, physical list of your specific spiritual weaknesses, whether it's pride, gossip, or worldly attachments. Step 4 involves rigorously disciplining yourself and actively praying those specific things out of your life. And finally, step 5 is a relentless cry to heaven, literally begging to be broken. To really highlight just how powerful that final step is, the speaker shares this unbelievable anecdote about the great evangelist John Knox. Looking at all the sin in his town, Knox reportedly didn't pray for money or a spouse or a bigger platform. He prayed one singular relentless prayer: Lord, break me. The story goes that he prayed it until he literally lost his voice. And according to the text, because he achieved total brokenness, he was granted such immense divine power that within a single week, the sheer force of his presence and prayer shut down every single drinking pub in his entire town. So, what does this all mean? Ultimately, this brings us to the core takeaway of the entire explainer. The speaker is emphasizing that there are certain levels of spiritual authority that you simply cannot reach through faith alone, or through praise, or just regular worship. The ultimate admission ticket to genuine, unshakable divine power is absolute brokenness. According to this theology, God is actively searching for broken vessels to fill with his power. The framework presented by Dr. Olukoya is demanding, it's uncompromising, and it is deeply challenging to our human nature. It literally asks you to abandon pride, embrace the unpalatable, and allow your self-will to be entirely shattered. So, based on the theology we've explored today, we want to leave you with one final provocative thought to consider. Are you willing to be broken to find your true power? Thank you so much for joining us for this explainer, and we will see you next time.